You will hear me in this podcast referring to people that I've spoken to in the past week, 2, or month, and all of the identities have been carefully concealed so that they have privacy. Do you wish there was a way that you could unlock the effects of trauma and separate from the effects of trauma without going into denial or coping skills that don't serve you? If that is something that you're interested in, stick around because that's what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Michelle Pava. You're listening to The Muddy Path, and today we're going to be talking about unintegration and a Zen way of looking at healing moving through trauma. Trauma is a difficult thing to cope with. It can leave you feeling lost and overwhelmed. It can affect the way that you interact with the world around you and in the way that you think and feel about yourself. There's a way to help yourself. There's actually many ways to help yourself, but one of the ways that we're going to be talking about today is unintegration. And it's a series of strategies that will help you to unlock your capacity to heal by helping you to separate the effects of trauma or stress from your current life trauma. And it's also effective in empowering you to heal and reclaim your life. Through different strategies, you can begin to identify and explore the effects of trauma on your life. You can recognize and accept the parts of yourself that were distorted or shut down during the traumatic experience or experiences. Through this process of exploring and understanding the effects of trauma, you can reclaim the part of yourself that was lost or disconnected during that traumatic experience. If this feels a lot like accepting suffering, you're right. You're absolutely correct. So we're going to be looking at how we can accept the suffering to empower us to reclaim our lives again. Again, if you are new here, I'm Michelle. You're listening to The Muddy Path, where we talk all things transpersonal psychology and Buddhist philosophy. Before we get into how to disconnect and how to empower yourself, I want to talk about some of the benefits. Now, we've already talked about that we can dive into focusing back on our beliefs and emotions and behaviors and things that we need to reconnect with, reclaiming the parts of ourselves that were lost or disconnected during the traumatic experience, and also explore and understand the effects the trauma has had on us. But another benefit is that it helps us to develop healthier coping strategies by managing this trauma and its effects, and therefore any stress or conflict that we have in the future. So I want to tell you 2 different stories, okay? Because a lot of times stories can help us to better understand what we're feeling in a cathartic way. So the first story is about a man that I spoke with recently who was going through some problems in his relationship, and he was exhausted because he was traumatized. Trauma does that. It absolutely exhausts you. But I believe that his wife was also traumatized in a different way, maybe in the past, maybe in the present, probably a little of both for both of them. And so he was exhausted and his focus was, I just want to move forward. I just want to get on with life. He didn't want to rehash the things that he already spoke about to other therapists. And so I get where he was coming from with that 100%. He was exhausted. He wasn't in a place to have that discussion. The difference is different therapists have different types of modalities and strategies, and it's really hard to help someone if you don't want to have a discussion about what has happened in the past. So whether it's coaching or therapy, it's going to be tough to help someone if they're already shut down, right? If they're telling you basically, I'm shut down, I'm not doing A, B, and C, but I want to get to X, Y, and Z. But in order to have all the other letters of the alphabet make sense, you still need the A, B, and C. Anyway, so where he was in disintegration as opposed to integration or unintegration. So disintegration is when you're in a current stressful space and you are basically bottomed out with resources. You've done the things, it hasn't worked, and now you're just like, okay, I'm going to push all of this aside and I'm going to move forward. And sometimes that works. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes that works, and it may work for him. He's a very creative person, and I think it might work for him. That being said, I'm going to tell you another story. And this is going to help you to understand why unintegration is so important, because that first story is just about someone who is not in a space of unintegration. Okay. This is a person that is in disintegration, and disintegration sounds a lot worse than it is. It just means that you're currently in a stressful space and they're not yet in a space of healing, but they are wanting to get out of the pain. But this next story is more of a fictional story. So do you remember the movie Twilight? So Twilight had a vampire and humans and wolves and all of this. And if you're not familiar with it, it's very interesting to look at that movie just from a space of looking at archetypes. But for now, let's just talk about unintegration. So when you have this movie that has all of these different archetypes, the wolf archetype is, and all of them, I believe, are sort of half human, half this other thing that they have going on. But anyway, Jacob is this wolf he's a werewolf who in the day, he is a regular teenage boy. And then in the evening, he's a werewolf, or when he's angry. I actually forget. But the bottom line is at the end of the movie, he gives an imprint. He imprints Bella's daughter. And Bella is his friend at this point, who he wants to protect, but he really wants to protect her daughter as well. And so a lot of people at that time, I remember, were saying that the imprint meant that he was in love with her. I don't know. I didn't watch past that. And I don't even know if there's anything past that. But usually imprints in a fictional space mean protector. So an imprint is something that he has no control over. He doesn't know when Bella's daughter will need to be protected. And maybe it is romantic. Maybe because he doesn't age, maybe when she becomes of age, maybe they fall in love. Who knows? The bottom line is just because he imprints doesn't mean he knows how it's going to play out, right? Okay, why am I talking about Twilight? Because an imprint is very much like trauma. When we are traumatized, whether it is something that is a one-time, like boom, you're traumatized, or if it's something that is chronically happening, or if you're exhausted because you think you've done all the things and you just don't have energy anymore, we don't know how trauma is going to show up. And so in disintegration, or in a space where you are not moving forward, but you feel like you're moving forward, a lot of people do this. In fact, we've all done it if we've had trauma. We all decide, you know what? I'm still going to go to work the next day. I'm still going to date, even though I'm not ready to date. I'm still going to XYZ. Or I'm never going to date again. Or I'm not going to go up on that ladder because I fell the one time. Or I was in a car accident and now I'm not going to drive. We all have the things that we do that are coping strategies. And if we allow trauma to take hold, that's what's happening. Sometimes there are coping strategies that we need. Sometimes they're really maladaptive that stop us from living our best life. And if we don't work on our trauma, we are now in a place where we are living a life based upon the effects of our trauma. We're not in a space that we're unintegrating and then feeling incredibly free and happy. We're moving forward because we want the identity, we want the self-confidence, we want the self-worth, but we're not quite there. So we're moving through the day, doing activities that we may even like and enjoy, but we don't have that sense of wholeness that we could have had. So let's talk about how we get that space of identity and worth and confidence. So the first thing that we have to do is identify what are the trauma-related issues and goals. We don't know those until we can have a conversation about them. If you are not in a space to have that conversation, there are other ways to work through something that is not dialogue focused. So it might be a moving meditation, but usually if you're in a traumatized space, it is a really good idea to work with someone who is trauma informed to help you through it, even if you've done it a million times in the past. So if you find someone that you connect with, that's very important. And I should also mention, in all fairness, it's very possible that the gentleman that I was speaking about earlier, it's very possible that I just wasn't a match for him. You do have to have someone who is a match, who you feel like has what it takes to work with you on a personality space. You have to have a connection, because if you just go with anyone, even if they're trauma informed, even if they're groundbreaking, popular, the whole thing, you still need to have a connection with that person, or it's not going to be as effective. So I just want to put that out there. So you have to identify the trauma related issues that you have going on. You have to be able to in some way express it, and you have to have goals for getting through them. So when I say trauma related issue, for instance, a lot of people can understand this because almost everyone has had some kind of a breakup, unless you married your high school sweetheart and you never had an argument. So if you're in a relationship and you think that relationship is becoming unraveled and you're breaking up, that's not the trauma related issue. That's something that's happening, but the trauma related issues might be that you're not sleeping in bed, or that you're developing a weight gain, or you're losing your appetite, or you're having panic attacks, or a lot of other symptoms, right? So those are the trauma related issues, but you do have to be able to speak about the trauma related issues. And again, some of them might be insomnia, anxiety, not driving, not going on the elevator. Just there's so many different trauma related issues. I couldn't even begin to touch upon even 1/100th of them, but you get what I'm saying. The trauma related issues are the effects of what happened because of the trauma or the chronic stress, which in turn becomes a trauma. So that's the number one thing. Number two, develop an understanding of the actual trauma and its effect on your life. So again, we have the trauma related issues of what happened and how it's affecting you, but also how is it affecting you in the day-to-day right now? So if in the day-to-day right now, you can't be in your home and have a casual conversation and walk up and hug your partner because they are uncomfortable with it because of whatever they're going through, then that's an effect of your trauma and their trauma. So you both have to be able to, if you want that relationship to work on yourselves and understand that you're both going through trauma related effects. The next thing, and I'm just using couples as an example right now. The next thing is that you want to encourage and explore the effects of the trauma. So you need to encourage yourself. You need to motivate yourself. You need to gather whatever resources you have in your mind to be able to, and I shouldn't say mind, your heart, your soul, wherever you can gather this, you need to really try to understand it. So in Zen, in Buddhism, it's looking at our suffering and acknowledging our suffering. And then we are going to make friends with our suffering. And like I always say, you open the front door, you get to know them, but you don't invite them to sit on the couch. Suffering does not come and sit on the couch and redecorate the house with you, but you do open the door and have a conversation. So you acknowledge that they're suffering, and then you get to know the suffering more deeply. Now, another thing that we do for unintegration is you need to reclaim and integrate the parts of yourself that were distorted or shut down during the traumatic experience or the chronic stress that you had in life. Someone else that I was speaking to very recently was telling me that he was having a space of not wanting to create artwork. And it wasn't that he didn't love artwork. It's just that he remembers that his dad would always say to him, you have to do artwork because I wanted to be an artist. Therefore, I want you to do artwork and let's do art together and just all of this. So that's a part of himself that was becoming disintegrated or taken away or distorted or shut down because he started to resent the very fact that he even had a gift for art because he was being pushed into it and it was becoming a very pressure focused and, dare I say, in the way that he explained it to me, traumatic experience. And that happens with a lot of families. If you think back to your childhood, what are the things that you were either pressured to do or told you could not do? And how did that affect you in your life now? What do you think about those things now? And do you feel guilt if you do these things? So think about that. So when you are reclaiming a part of yourself, that is also where in Zen, the philosophy is now that we understand our suffering, we are going to make peace with that suffering. we're not going to invite it in. We're not going to say, here, check out the couch. Do you like it? And what do you think of my curtains? You're going to say, okay, you are my suffering and I am making peace with you. Because the more I understand you, the more I can reclaim who I am without you. You have to understand who you are in relation to your suffering to better understand who you are. And in this, lastly, from a therapeutic space, it's developing the healthier coping strategies and managing your emotions, even for the future. As you get to know these strategies, you can then manage the future so much better because you have more resources. You have a higher resilience level. And so in Zen Buddhism, we would take this and go, okay, well, now that we understand the suffering, we've made peace with the suffering, we honor the suffering deeply, we are ready to transform the suffering. We're transforming this energy into something else. So in this, you have to create a plan. The plan cannot be, okay, I'm exhausted and I'm just going to go do something else. The plan cannot be, I'm just not going to create artwork, or you know what, I was in a car accident and I'm just not going to drive on the bypass or on the highway. It can't be anything that is maladaptive in any way or shutting you down emotionally. You can't say that you're healing if part of you has to be in a facet that is disconnected from other parts of you or other roles that you are in. So unintegration is really reclaiming who you really are, and also honoring that if the people around you are truly not being malicious, but they're suffering, it is to understand that you have suffered also, and you have created some disconnect as well, as the other people may have. If you had abuse, or if you had something very traumatic happen to you, not just a stressful event that was pressured or uncomfortable, but it was actually something that you could say 100% unapologetically, that was something that was very traumatic to me, and that changed me in an instant, or that changed me over time, then that's where you have to still process. You need to have the tools and the resources. So from a Zen space, I don't necessarily want you to just sit and meditate on this. I was talking to somebody else this week, and I said, I don't want you to sit and meditate, because a lot of times when you tell someone who's in trauma or in active trauma or crisis, okay, just sit down and meditate, that is going to make them more anxious. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are not very, I would say, mindful informed. They've read about it, they know it's a good thing, and they say, oh yeah, go meditate, go be mindful. Oh, I'll teach you some box breathing or something like that. But they haven't really studied the neuroscience of it. And if you don't have the neuroscience of it behind your strategies, you could really harm someone, or at minimum, make them feel very uncomfortable. And therefore, they won't want to sit and meditate or be mindful. And they will say that mindfulness doesn't work, when really it's the method doesn't work of mindfulness that they are experiencing. So if you are a stressed out person right now, if you've had trauma, number one, I want you to work with someone. But number two, I also want you to have support. If you are interested, I do have a support group that is available to you. It is not a replacement for therapy, but it is a space for Zen philosophy, having discussions about different modalities in philosophies and theories in psychology, and just having education and literacy through that, so that you know the type of person that you might want to work with on one-to-one. Also, it's important for you to keep moving. The body wants to move. And when we have trauma, that might show up as weight gain. That might show up in a lot of different ways. High heart rate, hypertension, autoimmune issues. It can show up in a lot of different ways. And so what I want you to do is, I want you to recognize that the trauma that you had, or even the chronic stress that you had, slowly disconnected you and shut you down from your truth. Because your truth isn't an unhealthy person. Your truth is that you are healthier than you probably are presenting to yourself and to the world around you. So having the philosophy of honoring our suffering and making peace with it and understanding it more deeply, so that we can release it. Because once we understand it and make peace with it, it is no longer something to fear. It is something to manage rather than fear, push away, push down inside of us, or in some way project onto other people. So in this, regardless of where you stand in your trauma, in your stress, in your crisis, I want you to focus on the idea that instead of disintegrating your life by having the effects of trauma, find someone to work with, make sure you have support. And again, I have a support group I would love for you to be a part of. Go to my website. So just go to mymuddypath.com, go to my website to explore that. But also I want you to self-heal as well. You have the ability to self-heal if this is manageable for you. So if this is manageable for you, go through those steps that I told you about, download this podcast, listen to it, and understand that you have the power within you to reclaim yourself, to reconnect to yourself, and to feel an inner peace that maybe you have never felt before. And at minimum, to get back to the truth that you were before that trauma. My name's Michelle Pava. You've been listening to My Muddy Path, and I would love for you to subscribe and stay connected and visit me at mymuddypath.com.